a plantation. No, it's a plantation.
To visitors, welcome to beautiful Malaysia. And to Malaysians, welcome home.
This is the greeting you probably heard if you flew into KL International Airport. You probably also saw the aerial view of the edge of the peninsula and beautiful surrounding islands. But as you close in on the runway, it's difficult not to notice another very obvious feature of the current landscape: oil palm plantations. Dr. Nadine Rupert is a conservation expert at University Science Malaysia. She studies mammals and biodiversity of Malaysian forests and surrounding plantations. Her work on rat-eating pigtail macaques in the plantations made headlines around the world. Nadine has been living in the country for 20 years, studying these small mammals. She now considers Malaysia home. But she recalls first seeing the fledgling crops when she flew in from Germany as a student.
So when I came to Malaysia, the first time was more than 20 years ago. I flew in from Thailand over KL and I saw all these huge plantations and I didn't know what it was, so I thought maybe that's pineapples or something. I asked my friend. I was quite clueless actually.
Now, 2 decades later, those pineapples have grown up. In 2011, the oil palm became Malaysia's most valuable crop with an export value of $21 billion. Its rapid expansion has become one of the most controversial and polarizing topics in the world.
It's a pity to see all of this just be cut down, burnt off, and replaced by a bunch of clone plants.
To be honest, if I can say that, we don't have to eat or eat anything with palm oil. This is so bad. It's bad for the environment and it's bad for the human. It's not that good. So we can replace the palm oil, I don't know, maybe for coconut oil or we are from Spain, so we have olive oil.
Saya rasa tak ada masalah sebab actually my father pun menanam kelapa sawit di belakang rumah kat kampung. Ada about a few hektar jugalah kan. So tak ada mengganggu sebenarnya. Rasanya lagi bagus kot sebab dia green kan.
Regardless of public opinion, for many Malaysian families living in the village, growing oil palm is a way of life.
Okay, so oil palm plantations in general are rather work intensive, but they are also time saving compared to other crops, so they are quite attractive as a family business to own.
Nadine's husband and their family are among the many families that make up the vast majority of small growers of oil palm in Malaysia.
What happens is usually you only work a few days per month and the rest of the month the palms just do their own business. And in our case, we have a very small patch of land and it means my husband can usually work all by himself. We don't have to employ any people to do the job. So once a month he would get up quite early in the morning and start chopping down the big fruit bunches. And then he would also clear some of the leaves and look at other things for example, if there's too much overgrowth and checking on some of the maybe fruit damages. But generally that can be done within one day. So he would chop down the fruits and after that's done, he gets all the fruits onto a wheelbarrow and just puts them somewhere where later the truck that comes from the weighing station can pick up the fruits, and the workers from the weighing station and him help to put all the big fruit bunches onto the truck. And at the end of the day, he can just fetch the money from the harvest.
Clearly, growing oil palm is attractive to farmers because it is extremely high yield. This is why, on the same plot of land, oil palm produces 8 to 20 times more oil than soy, canola, or sunflower. Palm oil is also attractive to manufacturers. Because of its chemical properties, palm oil gives many products their crunchiness, palatability, and creamy consistency. It was also once seen as the better alternative to animal fats or hydrogenated vegetable oils. Its high stability and versatility makes it a common ingredient in many packaged food and cosmetic products, not to mention local cuisine. Because of surging demand, the introduction of this lucrative crop in rural areas became an important driver for economic prosperity. Thanks to agricultural policies in the 70s that favored expansion of crops like oil palm, Malaysia's poverty declined to less than 4% by the early 2000s. But such development and prosperity did not come without a price.
We are starting to see animals have no place to move, the fragmentation is so high that it causes a lot of animal species to be isolated inside small pockets of forest, small islands of forest. And besides that as well, we get problems of runoffs, especially from the palm oil plantation. So things such as fertilizers and everything else, they just seep into the water. And the Kinabatangan River is an area that is not just rich with wildlife biodiversity. We're also looking at the local community contact. So there's a lot of villages that are along this river that are highly dependent on what they can actually get from the river. So if the palm oil continues to stay along the riverbank, in the long run it will cause quite adverse impact to the local community in terms of getting fresh water supply.
Since 2010, cries of protest against pollution, indigenous land violations, and deforestation associated with some oil palm plantations grew louder and louder.
The European Parliament has banned the use of palm oil in biofuels. Every year, millions of hectares of rainforests are cleared to produce palm oil, but millions of people in Malaysia and Indonesia rely on the industry to make a living.
In 2019, amidst intensifying international campaigns calling for boycott and the EU banning its use as biofuel, the once lucrative palm oil suffered a threefold drop in value, from $169 to less than $65 a ton. The pain is felt mostly by the small growers, like Nadine's family.
I remember when I first came here and talked to my father-in-law, who has more land than we do, and he was mainly using that land for palm oil production. He made a really decent living about 15 years ago just from oil palm plantations. And ever since the prices have been falling, all the village people, the orang kampung who have palm oil plantations, they are struggling. I mean, it's not easy to maintain the lifestyle that you used to have, but for some it's really existential as well, because some really who have only a very small patch of land, who were dependent on making a living off that land, they are now not only struggling to maintain that land, meaning you have to buy fertilizers, those prices are not falling, they're still increasing. But just, you have to use money for your daily living. Many have children, many have to send these children to school, so they have to look for alternative income. So, of course, here in that village, going fishing is another source of income. So some have alternative incomes also through tourism right now, which luckily increased during the past 15 years as well here in this particular village. But not everywhere people have an opportunity to go fishing or, go for tourism. It's a way of living in a sense, and being a farmer, being outdoors is some kind of identity for many people as well.
Collectively, 40% of all plantations in Malaysia are owned by small growers. including indigenous people like Pauda, an orang asli of the Temea tribe. Before growing oil palm, he worked long hours foraging in the forest. The amount he received from selling precious plants and roots to the middlemen were barely enough for his family to survive.
Saya ada anak 6 orang. Ada anak 6 orang. Sekarang ni yang masih belajar ada seorang. Last. Kalau dulu kami bekerja ni duduk dalam hutan ni, potong bolu, potong rutan, jual daun bolu, herba-herba hutan, tukar ali, kaca patimah, begitulah jual. Kalau dulu inilah sumber kami. Satu batang ni dapat 15 sen sahaja. Walaupun jauh terpaksa kena mikul.
But after learning about oil palm, Pauda and his brothers began to slowly cultivate their crop on their small patch of land. Since then, his family no longer needs to work such long, hard hours. Together, they manage the plantation and also grow rubber trees and tropical fruits like banana and durian. Since then, they have time to rest with their families. They earn enough to send their children to school.
Saya rasa semenjak saya dah tanam sawit ni untuk anak-anak saya, alhamdulillah lah. Dia belajar, kita boleh cover sikit lah. Ladang ni tak banyak. Saya dengan adik saya berdua lah. Yang buat 10 ikan berdua je. Sikit buat. Sebab kita memerlukan tenaga sendiri.
But the drop in prices meant once more, Pauda's family had barely enough to survive the day. In response, the Malaysian government launched a domestic campaign to improve public perception on palm oil.
Kempen Sayangi Sawitku bukan sekadar meningkatkan harga komoditi, malah memberi kesedaran kepada orang ramai tentang khasiat minyak sawit. Menteri Industri Utama Teresa Kok berkata, pengetahuan sawit kepada rakyat Malaysia perlu agar dapat membantu kerajaan dalam menangkis persepsi negatif terhadap sawit di luar negara.
But even at home, there is growing impatience. Haze. Blankets of smoke from plantations grown on peatlands practicing slash and burn, reaching to particulate levels of higher than 200 parts per million, closing down schools and events across Southeast Asia, highlight once more the suffocating problems of this miracle crop. But is a palm oil boycott the solution?
Yeah, I never heard about.
Why are they boycotting the palm oil?
But deforestation, palm oil is not the only reason deforestation happen kan.
Palm oil ni sebenarnya banyak. So kita boleh membahagikan kawasan tu untuk kita keep for orang hutan and some for kita punya untuk kita punya penggunaan masa depan.
I have a feeling that even if the people can't continue with palm oil plantations, the plantations are still there, you know.
Home to some of the most iconic species in the planet, East Malaysia, consisting of Sabah and Sarawak, is also home to some of the largest oil palm plantations in the country. Largely covered by primary tropical forests, anything planted here requires a lot of forests to be cleared. The precious timber is logged and sold. New plantations are open. Forests become fragmented. The animals have no choice but to flee elsewhere, often into the hands of poachers. Among them is the Halarctus malayanus, or the sun bear, a species native to Southeast Asia. The world's smallest bear is nature's original honey bear and a formidable tree climber. The rapid expansion of plantations means many of these bears have less forest to forage for food.
Sun bears are forest-dependent species. They live in the forest, so without forest, they don't have any habitat. And obviously, what we see over the last 50 years across Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and Indonesia is that the rainforests here are replaced by oil palm plantation and other agriculture use as well. For the bearers that live adjacent to the oil palm plantation, they are learning to use this oil palm seed. So they would come out from the forest into the oil palm plantation to feed on the oil palm seed, usually not in a large number or in a very small number that has been consumed, and then they benefit from the oil palm seed. However, when they come out from the forest into the palm plantation, they are exposed to poachers, for example, because there are people hunting and poaching in the forest adjacent to in that ecotone site, in the plantations next to the forest at night times. And then when these people saw or encountered sun bear, they would not hesitate to pull the trigger and to kill the bear.
In a neighboring ecotourism center, the Sapilo Sanctuary houses the most iconic animal associated with deforestation in tropical countries, the orang-utan. Along with other primates native to Sabah and Kalimantan, the orangutan, or otherwise known as mawas to locals, have become a symbol for the anti-palm oil movement. For visitors riding along the river, proboscis monkeys and other local fauna can still be seen among forest trees. But from above, it's thinning rapidly, tenuously positioned between the water and encroaching plantation. While some locals view oil palm negatively, many Sabahans see the crop as a blessing and a resource for local development. Along with cocoa agriculture, the cultivation of oil palm provides a significant source of income for the people of Tawau. Once a thriving industry for the locals, the drop in crude palm oil prices forced the small growers to face the dilemma of maintaining the oil palm or changing crops. Some small growers have already closed their plantations.
Dulu pun tanam macam-macam crop kami tanam. Ya. Jadi kita tanam kelapa sawit, kita tanam getah, kita tanam koko, tanam kelapa, dan ada kopi. Kita multi cropping.
Tadi saya dimaklumkan dari kilang macam ada ladang kecil yang akibat kejatuhan harga. Jadi ada yang terpaksa jual ladang. Pakcik pernah jumpa?
Ada.
The local farmers in Tawau are proud of their oil palm as a modern crop cultivated using modern practices. Their crops produce high yields and their mills are self-sustaining. With bacteria used to break down residues in the wastewater and fruitlet shells used as fuel stock to power the mill, little waste is produced. They are baffled by the negative image of palm oil internationally. But increasing the complexity of conceptions is the fact that the iconic tropical forests and biodiversity of Borneo is split over two countries. Northern Borneo belongs to Malaysia's Sabah and Sarawak, and the southern region belongs to Indonesia's Kalimantan. Beyond borders that are blurred by interlinked forests, there is stark difference in regulation, and consequently, stark difference in practices.
To me, actually, I view palm oil as a disaster in terms of ecology, biodiversity, and as a very recent disaster. It's a little bit different in Malaysia and in Indonesia, because when I arrived to Indonesia for my first time in 2005, the palm oil actually did not felt as the major problem of conservation or primate conservation. Deforestation is slowing down, but we are actually starting seeing the other impacts of palm oil, and it very much relates to issues of soil degradation and sedimentation, because I work in coastal area, the pollution, because all the urea and herbicides that are used, and the industry, because following the palm oil plantation expansion, there is another boom, and that's a boom of refineries, bulking station and processing industry. And that's something what didn't happen so fast as cutting down the forest, but the impacts can actually be perhaps even worse, and it goes from the forest even to the seas, and we are losing coral reefs, for example.
Dr. Stan Lota is a colleague of Nadine's. His opinion of palm oil, based on his experience in Kalimantan, is clearly negative. As a conservationist, how does she defend growing a crop that is accused of threatening biodiversity and survival of one of the world's most important ecosystems?
Just to say that very clearly, like generally, I am strictly against deforestation, against cutting down any virgin forests. But personally, this is just like a stroke of luck. So this land had never been forested before. This is an old paddy field, rice field that is very close to the ocean as well. And because of the salinity, so these schemes for planting rice here failed, and then people tried other land uses. And my father-in-law was one of the first, about 30 years ago, who started planting oil palms on this land. So then he gave the plantations to his children as well. I think another thing that many people don't realize is not every plantation is actually grown on forest land. So especially in Malaysia, before, we have a long history of rubber plantations and different other land use types, for example, cocoa plantations and so on. So a vast majority of existing plantations is built on land that was already converted hundreds of years ago. So not every single plantation means deforestation. But of course there are cases, and these are the cases that we have to address.
Recognizing the socio-economic value of palm oil and the problems associated with some production practices, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO, was born. It is a member-based organization which includes voluntary membership from producers, buyers, and NGOs. The RSPO currently provides the international gold standard for sustainable palm oil certification.
The RSPO, being a multi-stakeholder organization that encompasses the full supply chain, is a market-based solution to drive uptake of palm oil that's produced sustainably. That means mitigating and eliminating the impact on both humans and on the environment. And the way we do that is through a consensus-based membership system that designs a set of principles and criteria that inform a certification standard. So what we do is we certify plantations to ensure that the impact on the workers, the communities, and the environment is minimized or eliminated.
Incorporating sustainability into the palm oil industry was among the key motivations for researchers like Nadine, looking for opportunities for peaceful coexistence between plantations and wildlife.
So here we studied two groups, habituated groups of wild pigtail macaques, and both groups have about 40 individuals. So we're looking at like 80 macaques that we follow and take behavioral data. And during our 2 years assessment, we found that these two groups, they eat about 3,000 rats per year per group. But we should also mention that there is another biological pest control that has been used widely in oil palm plantations, and that's the barn owl.
At 11,380 hectares, the Sime Darby Carey Island plantation is among the largest RSPO certified plantations in the world. It has been using barn owls as a biological pest control.
Barn owls are like super efficient. They can eat up to 1,000 rats per year per individual. And so we think that these two species, together with some other carnivores, are really great for controlling rat numbers in oil palm plantations. So the benefit of having biological pest control species or predators in oil palm plantations is actually that you can reduce the number of rat poisons. They are quite harmful to the environment and also to other species. They can cause secondary poisoning, and they're also quite expensive.
But besides the use of barn owls as pest control, a visitor might notice there's not much difference between this certified sustainable plantation and other plantations. According to the plantation manager, the key for Carey Island's sustainable certification lies beyond what is visible on the plantation itself. It is in fact the much more complex regulation of working conditions and the traceability of the palm oil.
So sustainable palm oil for me personally means deforestation-free palm oil that can be traced through certification schemes that are transparent.
Certified products, sales, and processing activities of palm oil and palm kernel from the mill to the refineries are registered using RSPO's Palm Trace. This enables the RSPO to ensure that the palm oil is not coming from deforested areas of high conservation value.
When you apply HCV, when you want to expand, you need to apply two different approaches. HCV is to identify the high conservation value, whether there are rare species of trees, whether this is an area where all the animals come to drink water from, are there nests for very rare birds. So the higher the conservation value, the more likely you cannot deforest, you must maintain. And therefore, no masuk, tak boleh masuk.
For the end consumer, all of this boils down to a label on a product. And being the largest certified sustainable palm oil producer in the world, Sime Darby is painfully aware of prevailing negative images against palm oil and even sustainable palm oil in Western countries. They feel pressured by a need to both clean up dirty players of palm oil while challenging the unfair perception that palm oil is by nature unsustainable.
Palm oil, and there's no getting away from it, is the most productive crop. We often say it's 10 times better than soy, but the new varieties, which are produced by conventional breeding, not GMO, and people forget that, but the conventional breeding in oil palm, make oil palm up to 20 times more efficient. And that means for 1 ton of oil, we're using 20 times less land. So, if people were to switch as a result of a boycott, a ban, the indirect consequences, I think, would be catastrophic.
In addition to its RSPO membership, Sime Darby is also known to fund conservation efforts in localities they operate. Wilmar International is also an RSPO member who pride themselves on committing to sustainable practices and pushing conservation efforts, such as establishing riparian buffer zones. These strips of conserved forests between plantation and rivers provide habitats for wildlife in agricultural areas. The buffer zone intercepts sediment and other materials and pollutants from entering the water. Although they do not own as many plantations, Wilmar has a strict policy of ensuring that plantations in their supply chain is traceable and meets RSPO criteria, particularly with regards to social responsibility and welfare of the communities.
It started off with improving the housing conditions, so moving from wood-based houses to cement concrete houses with 3 rooms. We now have standard size. So a standard house for a worker family would be a 3-bedroom with a kitchen and a living room, terraced house with a little garden at the front and back, with running water, with electricity provided, often free. We have creche facilities, and that is for babies to be taken care of while parents go to work, to allow that to happen.
Some local plantation owners like Sabah Softwoods provide a portion of their land to NGOs. These lands are repopulated with forest trees to build wildlife corridors. These forest corridors cutting through plantations are able to connect fragmented forests. The corridors enable migration of animals, such as the Bornean elephant, a species particularly threatened by deforestation and human-wildlife conflict in plantations. Besides providing solutions to plantations that suffer crop loss and damage when these large animals enter, efforts to replant these corridors have also become attractive educational ecotourism activities.
So this forest corridor is around 14 kilometers long to connect between this forest and the main forest. To plant all kinds of native trees here. Most of them are fruiting trees, some fig trees, and also a few hardwood trees. So these trees are important for some of the animals like orangutans, hornbills. So far now we have been recorded orangutans around the corridor. So it shows that it's quite successful. They managed to attract orangutans, and elephants also goes there regularly. This plantation company, Sabah Sofood Berhad, they have already initiated this corridor plan several years ago. So, but only last year we started to work with them, collaborate with them to bring more work, more manpower, and more plants to help them with the corridor project.
There are also several other projects around the Kinabatangan by local NGOs like Ape Malaysia and Pongo Alliance. They work with communities to reforest critical areas and find ways to reduce threats to iconic animals like the orangutan.
The main focus is to reconnect back areas of the forest that are heavily fragmented because of human activities. So we pretty much plant trees and we try to get the corridors formed. Basically, the area that we are working has a fair share of issue with illegal encroachment, especially along the riparian reserves. So palm oil is actually an issue in some of the places that we are actually doing habitat restoration work.
And one of the key findings of our work is that orangutans are doing well in the degraded protected forests. We showed that males are able to come in and out of our study site, and that the females that are within the protected forest are doing very well. They're raising their offspring to adulthood, just as orangutans all throughout Borneo and Sumatra are doing. In the Kinabatangan area, it's already a fully developed landscape. It's been developed for 15 or 20 years. And we know that we have about 800 orangutans left within the Kinabatangan area. And that's just about enough to still consider a viable population. But those orangutans are not in one great big block. They're in smaller, isolated fragments that have not been converted, either protected or in private lands. So but yet they are one population, even though they're separated. So we now are in a situation in Kinabatangan that we need to engage the whole landscape, and the largest landowners in that landscape now are the oil palm plantations. So we need to elicit their collaboration to now save the wild orangutan population.
But despite these initiatives to improve sustainability of the palm oil industry, critics argue that it is not enough. The RSPO in particular has been accused of greenwashing. Many question its effectiveness given that its membership includes big and powerful palm oil companies, particularly in areas with poor regulation and transparency.
Anytime you create a system that's based on consensus, you're going to have some people that are unhappy that are on the outside of the organization. So their accusations could be around Greenpeace. I would challenge that statement. I would say that we are one of the most transparent organizations working in the agricultural commodity sector. We need to bring everyone together and design a solution where everyone gives up a little bit of something. That's where the RSPO comes in. We're very much in that gray space between those two suggestions of solutions. And I think that's actually where you make positive impact and you make positive change in the real world, because everyone has a seat at the table and everyone is pushing it. So you're gonna get accusations of greenwashing because they had to give up something to get something.
The RSPO is not the only sustainable palm oil certification scheme in Malaysia. As a matter of national pride, to clean up and separate the image of Malaysian palm oil from competing producer countries, Malaysia has pushed for all plantations to be certified under the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil, or the MSPO, scheme by December 2019.
The oil palm industry is very important to the Malaysian economy. So it contributed to about almost 60 to 70 billion ringgit every year. And it is quite difficult for you to find another crop to replace palm oil or to replace oil palm. What we should do now is, instead of moving away from the industry, we should look at the industry itself, how to focus on the downstreaming part, not to emphasize so much on land expansion. As a matter of fact, the government has actually implemented or have actually decided to cap the hectareage to be 6.5 million hectares by next year. So meaning to say that there will not be any more expansion after 2020. Because we have got the MSPO in place, we can always tell them, look, if you talk about sustainability, we are going towards that. We are also having the MSPO in place to show that we are producing sustainable palm oil. If you're concerned about certified palm oil, here we are.
Many conservationists believe such diversification of existing plantation use is an important element of reducing deforestation and improving sustainability in the industry.
In the case of Malaysia, there is a huge effort by the government now to increase sustainability and increase certification efforts. And the government had promised to cap the conversion of forests into oil palm plantations at an area size of 6.5 million hectares. And currently there are 5.8 million hectares of oil palm plantations in Malaysia. So generally there's the will to mitigate these problems associated to deforestation for oil palm plantations, and that's very laudable. And if in the future we can save and conserve all these existing old growth forests through these protection schemes by the government, that would be the fantastic, would be like an ideal or fantastic scenario. So existing oil palm plantations, they can be also diversified.
Part of this diversification effort has spurred research, development, and peripheral industries that use huge amounts of plantation waste, such as the empty fruit bunches, the mass from the palm tree, and other residual products.
People who use the trunks to make outright, just like you use wood, but a lot of the uses are from fibers. Once you remove the fruits, you get empty fruit bunch. That's basically it. So with this empty fruit bunch, you go to a pre-processing to make fibers. And those fibers can be inside a couch like this. We're talking about a lot of unutilized or underutilized resource. And there are many types of residues. There's the trunks, there's the palm fronds, the leaflets, and there's the empty fruit bunches. And these are renewable because we produce this all year round. So this is a renewable form of feedstock which we can use to make fuels, chemicals, and materials. That's generally what we've been doing.
But while pressure remains on producers to improve practices, some NGOs, such as the World Wildlife Fund, believe that big buyers and consumers must also play a role to ensure that sustainability is achieved throughout the chain of supply and demand.
So there are three key players here, and I'd like to link them back to the supply chain. So we've got producers on one end that are constantly under heavy fire and pressure to ensure that they produce responsibly. And I think that level of pressure should be maintained because it's necessary. Then on the other spectrum, the first consumer, the first stakeholder that you mentioned, consumers. Consumers need to understand that they have the purchasing power to make things different. So until and unless Malaysian, specifically Malaysian consumers, because we're the second largest growers and we don't even demand for sustainable consumption in Malaysia. So when consumers start asking and demanding for sustainably produced palm oil to be included in the products that they buy, that message then goes back to the manufacturers of the products, so what we would call FMCG or palm oil buyers in general. So the manufacturers, the center of the supply chain, which is the third stakeholder that you mentioned. The key is they need to start buying because producers will produce what the buyers want. and buyers will use what consumers ask for. It's a chain that cannot be separated. So it's all interlinked, and when only one point of the supply chain is under pressure and the rest are not supporting it, we'll find that it breaks eventually. So there needs to be a call by consumers and buyers to start buying and consuming responsibly through the purchase of sustainable palm oil.
Malaysia is the world's second largest producer of palm oil. Malaysia is also its world's 5th largest consumer. But unlike elsewhere, in Malaysia much of this oil is used for cooking. Most Malaysians will proudly tell you the food here is the best in the region, perhaps even the world. In Georgetown, Penang, Nazlina Hussein has been hosting a regular cooking class for 11 years. She has served many visitors, mostly from abroad, a taste of traditional Malaysian cooking. While she encounters skepticism and sometimes even hostility when she uses palm oil, she takes the opportunity to provide a different perspective.
In my class, if I use it for frying, it's normally palm oil. Whenever I pour out my cooking oil, they start asking, and you can see from their faces, they start getting defensive and worried, especially when they see how much oil that we use, especially when you do deep frying, right? When they say palm oil is bad for the environment, I would say palm oil is not the only crop that will destroy the environment. If you look at how other oils in other parts of the world being grown, they also encourage monoculture, they destroy biodiversity, and at the same time when the forests are cleared, animals and the flora all also disappear. Without palm oil, I think at the current economy, a lot of street food here will not function because there's simply not enough fund to buy expensive imported oil to make the food that we enjoy at a very cheap price.
Many people, like Nazlina and Nadine, who both recognize the socio-economic value of palm oil and want to ensure sustainability in the country, are often faced with a dilemma. Currently, only 21% of all palm oil produced globally is certified sustainable and responsibly sourced. Much of this is not sold or labeled as sustainable palm oil because there is not enough demand to push many big buyers to pay the premium. Where palm oil is viewed negatively, many companies simply choose to hide palm oil as an ingredient or replace it altogether.
But bioeconomists like Dr. Goh argue that replacing palm oil may have worse implications on the environment in the long run.
I would like to take the example of the US-China trade war as an example, which is a very recent one. So when China stopped buying soy from US, they have to buy from Brazil. And that will indirectly cause more deforestation in Brazil in order to fulfill the demand gap in China. So the same thing goes for palm oil. Imagine if one day we don't produce any more palm oil. So where are the people going to get their vegetable oils? From soy. Soy uses 10 times of the land that oil palm needs to produce vegetable oil. So in that sense, we only have limited land in the entire planet, so it's impossible to get rid of palm oil.
Elsewhere, palm oil remains an economical ingredient, a basic part of local cuisine, and a crucial source of income. Indeed, palm oil remains polarizing.
Penting juga untuk chef mengekalkan minyak sawit dalam masakan dia, sebab kalau tengok dalam menu apa yang kita buat ni, resepi yang kita buat ni, jadi memang datang orang kata 15% tu hasil daripada tu.
How can all these different views be reconciled? To truly achieve sustainability, Nadine feels unity is the key.
Yeah, so I think in the long term, sustainable palm oil is definitely achievable, but all stakeholders really have to have a common vision and work for sustainability. This means that also the policies and the enforcement especially have to be really strong, and transparency has to be provided, and the consumers have to believe in it.
We have to get to a point where we have to recognize it's the right thing to do. Running from the issue choosing another oil seed is not going to do anything. What we need to do is focus on improving the system that we have in place.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some sort of understanding or regulation or something that figures out how much we actually need, rather than just keep producing this stuff just for money. You know, figure out how much we need and do it in a sustainable way.
Just shop less, buy less, consume less.
Really, I think boycotts are not the answer. The answer is really to ask for sustainable palm oil or products that contain sustainable palm oil.
In the meantime, the complex story of palm oil continues to unfold. The question is, how will it end?